Okay, so, we always love getting your sources, and it seems like you're really interested in something. A lot of our listeners are curious about female orgasm and sexual pleasure, and, with all the myths and, the confusing information out there, it's no wonder people want some actual clarity.
You're absolutely right. I mean, who wouldn't? And that's exactly what we're doing today, diving deep into Ann Poston's book, Coming Soon, Great Orgasms and Better Sex at Your Fingertips.
Ooh, I like that title.
Yeah, right? And Poston, she's a psychotherapist and a sexologist, and she's had her own practice since 2008, so she knows what she's talking about. And the really interesting thing to me is just how much interest there is in her work. Like her thesis research back in Switzerland had 15,000 survey respondents, which is huge.
Wow, 15,000. That's a lot of people wanting information.
Exactly. It shows you how important this topic is, and I think Poston's mission with this book is so important. She wants to get rid of all the nonsense and the bad information surrounding female orgasm, and her belief is so empowering that every woman can have great orgasms and that getting to know your body is something that can benefit you for your whole
It's
life.
about taking control.
Yeah, exactly. And the book gives you like a really comprehensive guide to do just that. It covers everything from basic anatomy to the importance of practice, how to deal with shame, really understanding arousal, the role of the pelvic floor, the balance between movement and tension, the power of self-focus, and then how to take all of that and bring it into your experiences with a partner. It's a pretty holistic approach, I'd say.
So let's get into it then. Like,
Right.
one of the things that always comes up is this whole vaginal versus clitoral orgasm debate. Feels
Mm.
like it's been going on forever.
Yeah, it has. And what's really interesting is that Poston actually challenges this whole idea of them being totally separate things. Yeah, she says that what people usually call a vaginal orgasm, the one that happens from penetration, almost always involves some type of clitoral stimulation, whether it's direct or just pressure.
Huh. I never thought of it that way.
Yeah, and she says that only like 30% of women regularly or always climax just from penis and vagina sex alone.
Wow, only 30%.
Yeah, and even more than that, like 60% of women don't really find penetration that arousing on its own.
That's really interesting. It kind of changes the whole narrative, doesn't it?
Definitely. And it leads us to her concept of sensitizing and this really important connection between the vagina and the brain.
Okay, I'm listening.
So think about it this way. Every part of your body has these nerve cells and sensors, and they send signals to your brain through pathways. And when those nerve cells are stimulated, they actually form more connections with the neurons in your brain.
So it's like practice makes perfect kind of thing.
Yes, exactly. Like when a ballerina practices for months, their brain region that corresponds to their feet becomes more active, or a pianist, their fingertips are so connected to their brain that it's like their fingers just know where to go.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. And Poston says the same thing happens with the vagina. If a woman hasn't developed that connection between her vagina and her brain because of, focused stimulation, then she won't really experience much sensation during sex because essentially her vagina hasn't really been woken up yet and hasn't been linked to desire and pleasure in the brain.
So it's not just something that, happens automatically. You have to develop it.
Exactly. And that's like the core idea of her book, that even orgasm through penetration is something you learn and develop. It's not just luck or chance. And she actually has a whole 10-step program in the book that's based on this idea.
So is she saying, like, we need to schedule sex like it's homework?
No, not at all. But she points out a couple of reasons why this whole idea of practicing for better sex isn't more well known. I mean, one is that, serious scientific research on female orgasm is actually pretty recent. And historically, from a purely biological standpoint, it wasn't really seen as essential because, the focus was on reproduction.
Right.
And she says that, the word training can feel a bit clinical and unromantic when you're talking about sex. No one wants sex to feel like homework.
Definitely not.
But she also talks about how women might be at a bit of a disadvantage when it comes to developing this connection.
Oh, how so?
Well, for one thing, female genitalia is mostly internal, so it's not as accessible for self-discovery as, something like a penis.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense.
And there's also a lot of societal shame attached to female genitalia. Like even the word pudenda comes from the Latin word for something to be ashamed of.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So, think about how often girls are told not to touch themselves or they're even punished for it.
It's so different for boys, though, isn't it?
Exactly. Boys are often encouraged to explore themselves, so it can lead to years where a woman doesn't really touch her vagina in a pleasurable way. And those neural pathways just don't get formed.
It's like they're missing out on a whole education.
That's a good way to put it. And then, a young woman's first experiences with her vagina might be with things like tampons, which aren't exactly pleasurable, and then maybe the first time she has sex, which can be exciting, but often isn't that physically pleasurable because those nerve endings haven't been connected to positive sensations yet.
So it's a combination of social factors and just, the lack of opportunity for exploration.
Exactly. And then life gets busy, and maybe there are differences in desire within a couple, and the focus on a woman's specific pleasure can get lost.
So that's why it's so important for women to take the time to really understand their own bodies. And Poston's book starts with this mini anatomy lesson to encourage that kind of inner exploration.
Yeah, and what I really like about it is her emphasis on developing an inner sense.
What does that mean?
So, it's good to use a mirror to get familiar with what things look like, but she really encourages women to learn about their bodies through touch, just using their fingers and exploring like a child would.
That makes sense.
Because we see our bodies from the outside, but we don't always pay attention to how they feel from the inside. And if you never really touch yourself in a pleasurable way, it can start to feel almost like your own body is foreign to you.
That's the same.
It is. And she starts with the labia, and she clarifies the difference between the inner and outer lips. And she makes it clear that there's a lot of variation in size and appearance, even between the two sides of one person.
I never thought about that.
Yeah, and she's really against those labiaplasty procedures because of the risk of nerve damage and scarring and numbness, which obviously is the opposite of what you want if you're trying to enhance sensation.
Right.
She explains that the outer labia are like protective fatty tissue, and the inner labia are thinner and more sensitive, and they swell when you get aroused. And for a lot of women, just touching the inner lips can be really pleasurable.
And then she talks about the clitoris, and she makes the point that it's bigger than you think.
Yes. The part you can see the glands is just a small part of the whole structure, which is about 3 inches long internally.
Wow, 3 inches.
Yeah, it includes the glands, the hood, the shaft, and the crura, which actually reach back and surround the entrance to the vagina.
I had no idea.
And the whole clitoris is packed with nerve endings, especially the glands, which has more friction receptors than the head of a penis even.
Oh, wow.
And it's made of erectile tissue just like the penis, so it fills with blood when you're aroused.
So knowing all that makes it even clearer why clitoral stimulation is so important for orgasm.
Exactly.
And what about the vagina itself? What does she say about its sensitivity?
Well, she describes it as an elastic tube about 2.5 to 5 inches long. And she says that the sensitivity varies along the length. Like the outer third has more nerve endings that respond to touch and friction, whereas the inner parts are more sensitive to pressure and stretching.
That explains why some women prefer different kinds of touch.
Yeah, exactly. And she also mentions that the cervix is sensitive to deep pressure and stretching. And she talks about how the non-aroused vagina is different from the aroused vagina.
How so?
Well, when you're not aroused, the walls are touching and there's lubrication from the cervical fluid. But when you're aroused, there's more lubrication and the vagina kind of balloons. It tilts upwards and expands so that it can accommodate penetration.
It's amazing how much the body changes.
It really is. And then, of course, she talks about the G-zone.
Everyone wants to know about the G-zone.
I know, right? She describes it as an area on the front wall of the vagina, about 2 inches inside and about the size of a quarter. And she says that the G stands for Ernst Grafenberg, who is the first person to describe it.
Makes sense.
But she also says that there's still debate about exactly where it is and what it is. But a lot of women say that stimulating this area feels good.
Yeah, I've heard that.
And biologically, it's thought to be made up of clitoral erectile tissue near the urethra, which is why when you first touch it, you might feel like you need to pee.
Oh, yeah, I've definitely felt that.
But with gentle and consistent stimulation, a lot of women find it to be really arousing. And she makes it clear that the G-zone isn't the only sensitive part of the vagina. The back and side walls, the cervix, and even the muscles around the pelvis all have sensory receptors. And the whole vagina can become more sensitive through exploration and practice.
So basically getting to know your own anatomy and how your body responds to different types of stimulation is like the first step.
Exactly. And then it's all about practice, which is step 2 in her book.
Practice makes perfect, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
She says that sex, and especially reaching orgasm, is like any other skill you have to practice it, like learning a musical instrument or a new language. And the more you use certain nerve pathways, the stronger and more efficient they become. But if you don't use them, they stay weak, and that's why clitoral stimulation might be more reliable for orgasm than vaginal stimulation at first, because the brain hasn't really built up those strong pleasure-focused connections yet.
So for someone who's maybe just starting to explore this, What would you recommend?
Well, this step is all about self-awareness, learning about your own arousal patterns, figuring out which areas of your body are most sensitive, and paying attention to how your body reacts to different kinds of touch pressure and rhythm. And she suggests some specific exercises like doing a self-exam of your vulva and vagina and really focusing on the physical sensations of arousal as they happen.
Interesting. And then in step 3, she talks about looking back at your sexual past. Why is that important?
Because she says that our experiences with our bodies and sexuality throughout our lives really shape our current patterns of arousal and the connections we've made or haven't made.
You mean like childhood experiences and stuff?
Yeah, like thinking back to when you first became aware of your sex parts, how your family talked about sex, your early experiences with touch and arousal, and how you felt about puberty and your first sexual experiences, it can help you understand why you might have certain preferences or why some parts of your body feel more or less responsive.
It's like connecting the dots between your past and your present.
Exactly. And she even has a questionnaire in the book with questions like, when did you first touch your genitals? And what did your family teach you about sexuality? And did you ever play doctor with other kids? It's really about understanding how you got to where you are now.
And she talks about playing doctor, which I think can be a sensitive topic for some people.
Yeah, and she makes it clear that it's actually a normal and healthy way for kids to explore their bodies as long as the kids are close in age and there's no pressure or coercion.
Right.
And she also says that even changing up your masturbation habits can be really beneficial because if you always do the same thing, your body gets really good at responding to that one specific type of stimulation. But by trying different techniques, different directions of touch, focusing on different areas, you can teach your body to respond to a wider range of stimulation. And that can make partnered sex more enjoyable because you're not so dependent on your partner doing one specific thing.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
What about vibrators? Does she talk about those?
She does. She says that vibrators can be really great for creating intense arousal, but she also points out that penises don't vibrate. So if you only ever have orgasms with a vibrator, then partnered sex might not feel as good in comparison.
That's a good point.
But she doesn't say you should throw away your vibrator. She suggests gradually reducing your reliance on it, maybe turning down the intensity, incorporating manual stimulation, and only using the vibrator if you start to lose arousal. That way you can kind of bridge the gap between the really intense stimulation of a vibrator and the more varied sensations of partnered sex.
Step 4 is called the arousal paradox. What's that all about?
It's about the balance between tension and relaxation in arousal, which is more complicated than you might think.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
So there's the parasympathetic nervous system, which is all about relaxation and calmness and feeling good, which are important for enjoying sex and feeling connected to your partner. But arousal itself actually requires some tension. So if you're too relaxed, you might not get aroused. But then if your sympathetic nervous system, which is your fight or flight response, is constantly activated because of stress or anxiety, it can block desire and make it hard to focus during sex.
So it's not as simple as just being totally relaxed.
No, and Poston says that movement is the key to balancing these two things because when you move your body during sex, some muscles tense up while others relax. So you're engaging both the fight or flight response and the relaxation response, and movement also helps spread the arousal throughout your body so orgasm feels more whole body.
It's like the arousal's flowing everywhere.
Exactly. And she suggests some exercises for this too, like really carefully exploring the sensitivity of your vagina inch by inch with your fingers and just bringing your attention to your vagina throughout the day to strengthen that connection between your mind and body.
And then in step 5, she talks about the pelvic floor muscles. Why are those so important?
Because a lot of people talk about how important it is to tense those muscles, like with Kegels. But she says that being able to both tense and relax them is crucial for both arousal and orgasm because the pelvic floor, which is this network of muscles and tissues that supports the organs in your pelvis, it controls blood flow sensitivity and lubrication in that whole area.
So it's kind of like a control center.
Yeah, and just like with the arousal paradox, the pelvic floor needs a balance of tension. Some tension can make orgasm more intense, but if those muscles are chronically tense, it can actually restrict blood flow and make you less sensitive and even cause pain during sex. So learning to tense and relax those muscles can really improve circulation and sensitivity.
She has exercises for this too, right?
Yeah, it's like learning to isolate your pelvic floor muscles and practicing contracting and releasing them.
Step 6 is about sexual fantasies and how they relate to arousal patterns. That sounds really interesting.
It is. She says that there's a connection between how we experience arousal physically and the content of our fantasies. Like, if you tend to focus on internal vaginal massage when you masturbate, You might fantasize more about penetrative sex, or if you're really tense during self-stimulation, you might have fantasies that involve power dynamics or force.
So our fantasies are a reflection of our physical experiences.
Exactly. And she says that as a woman becomes more sensitive vaginally through practice, it can actually change her fantasies. Like some women start fantasizing about sex with other women as they become more aware of their own anatomy and their potential for
It's
pleasure.
like the more you explore your own body, the more possibilities open up in your mind.
Exactly. And she also talks about desire and how it doesn't always have to come before sexual activity.
You mean you don't always have to be in the mood?
Yeah, she says it's like you don't always have to be hungry to eat sometimes.
Mhm.
Just starting to eat can make you feel hungry. And she says that sometimes intentionally initiating sex or using certain triggers, like remembering past experiences or watching something erotic, can actually spark desire.
I think a lot of people struggle with that feeling like they need to wait for desire to magically appear before they can have sex.
Yeah, and she also addresses those racing thoughts that people have during sex, and she suggests things like focusing on the physical sensations in your body and moving around as ways to stay present in the moment.
And then in step 7, she introduces this pelvic swing. What is that?
It's basically tilting your pelvis forward and back rhythmically while keeping your upper body still. And she says it's a great way to spread arousal throughout your body and also channel it towards orgasm, especially if you feel like you're getting close but not quite there.
It's like giving yourself that extra push.
Exactly. And you can do it in all sorts of positions, lying down on all fours, standing cowgirl, and she recommends practicing it on your own so it feels natural. And she even suggests doing it with a finger inside your vagina to really explore the sensations.
Step 8 is called be more self-centered, which sounds kind of counterintuitive for partnered sex.
I know, but she makes the point that learning to prioritize your own pleasure and focus on your own sensations during sex can actually make the sex better for both partners.
Really, how does that work?
Because when you're really in tune with your own body and what feels good, you take the pressure off your partner to do everything perfectly, and you actually increase your own enjoyment and desire, which makes you more attractive and engaging to your partner.
So it's like a win-win.
Exactly. She uses this analogy of sexual responsiveness as a tree, where your deep understanding of your own body and your consistent practice are the roots. And the stronger your roots are, the less you're affected by outside things or performance anxiety, and the better you can guide yourself and your partner towards amazing sex.
So it's about taking ownership of your own pleasure.
Exactly. And she encourages you to ask yourself during sex, do I like how this feels? And to move your body in ways that connect you to your own arousal.
And what if your partner isn't used to that?
She acknowledges that there might be some awkwardness at first, but she says that most couples are at a similar stage in their development anyway, and if your partner is used to you being more passive, they might need some time to adjust and learn new ways to respond. And she suggests exercises like moving your pelvis against still fingers to explore different angles and pressures, and consciously bringing your attention back to your own body if your mind starts to wander during sex.
So step 9 is called swinging it together. How do you take this pelvic movement and this focus on self-pleasure and actually bring it into partnered sex?
Well, this step is about incorporating those movements, like the pelvic swing, into sex with a partner so you can both experience more intense arousal and maybe even have orgasms together. And she says that the partner with the penis can actually stay pretty still while the woman uses her pelvic movements to control the rhythm, depth, and angle of penetration.
So she's really in control.
Exactly. And she encourages things like moaning and other sounds of pleasure and letting go of inhibitions to make it more erotic for both people. And she also says that it's okay to go back to familiar patterns sometimes, especially if you're just focusing on comfort and connection, and to just gradually introduce new techniques and movements. And she emphasizes that the goal should be to enjoy the whole journey of pleasure and connection, not just the destination of orgasm.
That's a great way to put it. And she has a specific exercise for this step, right?
Yes, just consciously incorporating pelvic movement into your next sexual encounter with a partner.
And finally, step 10, blasting off.
Huh.
Together, it sounds like this is about achieving lasting satisfaction in a relationship.
Yes, it is.
Mm.
She talks about the things that couples who have great sex for a long time have in common, and it's that both partners actually want to have sex for their own reasons, whether it's for the physical pleasure, the emotional connection, or just to relax. And when both people have developed that strong connection between their sexual anatomy and their brain's pleasure centers, then every touch can create arousal and enjoyment, and it creates this positive cycle in the relationship.
That makes sense.
And she introduces this concept called the party principle, which is basically just the idea that sometimes just starting to be physically intimate can spark desire even if you weren't feeling it before.
It's like faking it till you make it.
Kind of.
Yeah.
And she also talks about how perfectionism and this idea that sex should always be spontaneous can be harmful. And she suggests actually planning time for intimacy, which might seem unromantic, but it can be really helpful.
Yeah, I think a lot of couples struggle with that.
And in the end, she really emphasizes the importance of patience, understanding, and open communication about what each person wants and needs sexually. And she suggests this exercise where each partner writes down their sexual wishes, and then they find a safe and supportive time to talk about them together.
Wow, that was a lot to cover. But it feels like we really got a good understanding of Poston's approach to female orgasm and sexual pleasure. And I think the key takeaways are that it's all about really knowing your own body, practicing to strengthen those neural pathways, finding the balance between tension and relaxation, being self-aware, and using movement and open communication to create more pleasure.
Exactly. And for our listener, I really encourage you to think about what we've talked about today. Maybe look back at your own sources with this new information in mind. And if any of the exercises or concepts really resonated with you, maybe try them out.
So as you continue exploring this important part of your life, think about this now that you've heard all this. What's one small thing you can do to explore your own pleasure even more?
Or maybe think about how shifting your perspective on female orgasm from something mysterious and elusive to a skill you can actually learn might change your whole approach to intimacy and your relationship with your own body.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
We really appreciate your curiosity and your willingness to engage with this topic.
See you next time.
Bye.
Yeah.